The Man Who Saw the Light Over Winter Hill by Ian Gordon. On Winter Hill. Winter Hill, as the name suggests, is a broad hill constituting a sizable portion of the West Pennine Moors in northwest England, straddling the boroughs of Chorley, Blackburn with Darwin, and Bolton. The sweeping moor stands as a silent witness to centuries of curious history, from the rituals of the Bronze Age to the advent of telecommunication masts and towers in the mid-20th century. The heather-crowned expanse is marked by several ancient burial grounds, taking the form of evocative cairns. These sacred sites, shrouded in mystery, speak of forgotten rites in which men and women of a bygone era committed their dead to the barren landscape. The Winter Hill television transmitter, standing at a little over 300 meters in height, is the tallest in Britain. A cylindrical mast that not only connects communities through the airwaves, but also serves as a local landmark, casting its long shadow across the forbidding plain. Prior to the arrival of modern technology, the hill was largely shunned by local communities, said to be a hotspot for supernatural activity. Stories abound pertaining to packs of wolves, goatmen, goblins, and even portals to other worlds. And such legends aren't restricted to yesteryear. Tales of unidentified flying objects, pale creatures bathing in the blanket bog, bright lights over the expanse of wetland known as the Zark. Just a few of the phenomena reported by numerous individuals throughout the latter portion of the 20th century. Most visitors, however, remain unaware of Winter Hill's controversial mythology, instead drawn to the area by its quaint woodlands and extensive grasslands, peopled as they are by squirrels, foxes, sheep, and other terrestrial entities. The following handwritten account, penned by a 33-year-old security analyst by the name of Roman Smith, was mailed to an acquaintance of the author, Sean Davis, on January 6, 1998. Having read the account several times, Davis remains undecided as to whether or not to turn the manuscript over to the police. Sean, I'm sending my account to you because you're the most impartial person I know. I've attached a ridiculous story, and I can be reasonably sure that in your hands it won't go astray. If the job I've got planned comes off, you might read about it in the evening news. If not, well, at least I gave it a shot. Sorry to land you with this, but I didn't know what else to do. All the best, mate. Roman. A written account of my strange and terrible experiences at Winter Hill by Roman Smith. To whom it may concern, I'm off out shortly. I've a job to do. It might mean the end of me, an end there'll be no coming back from. A quick glance in the mirror reveals that I'm pretty much done for anyway. God knows what my mum and dad will think. Rosie knows some of what's gone on, but these last few days I've been avoiding her calls. Forgive me, sis. I can't have her up to her neck in this thing, sneaking around like an outlaw, counting down the days to destruction. There's a car parked outside right now. A Silver Vento with tinted windows. It's never too far away. There's a body lying a stone's throw from the two lads. A body that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for... Well, I'll get to that. And there's a threat that I'm hoping the following account will illustrate. I'll do my best to recount the whole story, despite my failing memory, starting at the very beginning. 1. Christmas Eve, 1997. I don't want to wax sentimental, so I'll try to stick to the facts. My name's Roman Hammond Smith. I'm 33 years old and, up until recently, was content living life as a confirmed bachelor. My profession as a security analyst satisfying my wants and needs. I live in Narrow Valley, a small village and suburb of Bolton in England's northwest. It's a quiet spot, mainly residential, positioned on the south-facing slopes of the West Pennines. We're hemmed in by trees and intersected by the trickling waters of Burnt Edge Brook. By all accounts, it's an idyllic place to live. Provides good access to the town centres of Bolton and Norwich, whilst retaining that rural feel, the perfect base for a rambler. On clear days, from several vantage points, you can see the top of the mast at Winter Hill, beckoning us locals to explore the boggy terrain it stands upon. I used to love doing that, but my wandering days are over. Well, almost. I have, or should I be saying had, a tradition on Christmas Eve. Every year at around 8 p.m, if the roads are clear of snow, I jump in the car and drive up to the mast. It's a 10-minute journey from here, accessed via a fairly precipitous and winding service road. I get out of the car, stand by the mast and gaze up at the night sky. What I'm looking for, I haven't a clue. I just like the idea of being up there on my own, with only the many-eyed mast for company. I try not to think too much about George Henderson, a Scottish merchant who was murdered there back in the 19th century. Some say old George haunts the transmitter building nowadays, but that's another story and not at all relevant to this one. This most recent visit, having stood by the mast, gazing up at the sky for some minutes, I climbed back into the car and decided to stop off at Crooked Edge Hill on the way back home. The hill is home to a pair of cairns known locally as the Two Lads. The site is particularly eerie, especially if you dwell on the numerous legends associated with it. Those of the two men who froze to death on the hill, or the spectre horseman who's said to frequent the surrounding bogs. Myths aside, though, standing by the bigger of the two cairns, you're afforded a fabulous view of the landscape below. It's jaw-dropping in the daytime, if the weather is behaving itself, and after dark it's equally dramatic. The lights of 100 towns meet your eye, an urban blaze, belonging to municipalities as far away as Liverpool. But that's enough scene setting. I suppose I was just trying to hold on to some semblance of normality. Things will never be normal again. I'll get to the beef. I was standing there, the chill of the moor nipping at my ankles, when suddenly, and for the briefest of moments, a flash of light illuminated Crooked Edge Hill. I expected the familiar rumble of thunder to follow, a natural expectation given the brightness of the light, but quickly realised that it wasn't coming. The skies above were clear. You'd have been hard pushed to spot a cloud. But what did follow was a sort of yelp, the sound you might hear if you accidentally step on the paw of a dog. I craned round to find the source of the sound, convinced that it wasn't too far away, but couldn't see anything. I looked to the north, back in the direction of the mast with its multiple red eyes, and heard other sounds, scuttling sounds amplified by the northerly wind. The moment I heard those noises, a shiver shimmied up my spine. I had absolutely no desire to find out what was making them. I took off at a sprint, wary of my footing on the uneven ground. The car was parked on the service road to the east. It took a few minutes to reach it, but I was steadfast. I reached the car, jumped in and took off. And though I didn't see anything else, didn't hear anything else, my heart was still racing when I got home. Impelled by that same mysterious fear, I locked all the doors and windows and drew closed every curtain. When asking myself why I was so rattled, I could only answer that I'd never experienced anything like that before. Such things would have been disturbing enough in the company of others, but alone, standing with the two lads, that flash of light and the ensuing sound served only to stir my imagination to frightening new heights. I recalled the old stories, the headless boggart and the devil of the ravine, the snow-hounds and the little men of County Bravardus, not to mention the rumours surrounding the strange happenings in the village of Felmont over the winter of 1957-58. Had I seen something of that world? Something I'd been blind to before? Surely not. I turned the television on and tried to distract myself with a showing of It's a Wonderful Life, but I found myself drawn to the window on more than one occasion, sneaking glimpses through a crack in the curtains at the uncomfortably quiet street outside. but there was nothing unusual out there. Just the hum of your average evening, and the promise of Christmas on the morn. But I didn't sleep well that night. My dreams were filled with strange little critters that yelped. 2. Christmas Day. On the morning of the 25th, I found myself a little less fraught than I had been the night before, despite the terrible sleep. I gathered my faculties as well as the handful of gifts I'd procured so diligently, and headed over to my parents' place in Chorley. The Christmas Day family dinner is a fairly common event up and down the country. I tried spending the day alone back in '93 and hadn't enjoyed it one bit, so I was prepared for and looking forward to the customary goings-on. My sister, Rosie, was already there when I arrived, and shortly afterwards the four of us were sitting by the fire in the living room, exchanging gifts. It was immediately apparent to my mum that I wasn't quite myself. She quizzed me about my appearance on the spot. "You look a bit rough round the edges," she said. "Are you all right?" "Just tired, Mum," I said. "Didn't sleep well last night." Rosie sighed at that. But we'd be at the dinner table later that afternoon before the subject came up again. It was my dad who asked, "What's been keeping you up?" And without a moment's hesitation, I told the three of them about my strange experience the night before, of the flash and the yelp, the scuttling sounds and the sprint to the car. My mum sneered, shaking her head, but my dad, serious as ever, looked me over with a critical eye. "You should know better than to keep going up there on your own," he said, "especially at night. It's not safe." "Not safe?" Rosie blurted. "What do you mean?" My dad rearranged some of the foodstuffs on his plate before elaborating. "I'm not one to suffer fools," he said, his stony face stonier than ever. "But it'd be foolish to ignore the hundreds of reports of people experiencing strange things up there. And I don't know what you're leering at." This he added in response to another sneer from my mum. "You couldn't make it through a single night in the Wilderswood." My mum tutted loudly. "It was bloody freezing, Dave," she barked. "And the rest," my dad said, rolling his eyes. "Okay, that's enough," Rosie interjected. "Christmas Day, remember." We finished the meal in silence, an awkward silence. I normally enjoy Christmas dinner, but no amount of cranberry sauce could have improved the atmosphere in that room. Later on, back in the living room, my dad brought the subject up again. Chomping on his pipe, as was his thing after dinner, he reeled off a dozen stories related to him as a child. Among the usual tales, he struck upon those curious rumours concerning the winter of 57-58, in which a band of troubled Felmonters traversed what was then the difficult terrain in order to reach Winter Hill, and allegedly came face to face with a variety of abnormalities. The same story is never told twice, but one detail seems to be common among those who tell it. A bright flash was seen over the moor, followed by an almighty explosion. How this related to what I'd seen the night before, I hadn't a clue, but my dad was adamant there was some sort of parallel. Rosie had listened to my dad's yammering with rapt attention, and so when the time came to leave, she asked if I wanted some company for a couple of days. Truth be told, I was still feeling a bit weird about the whole thing, and so I told her that'd be great, and to head over later that evening. For the purposes of context, I live on a quiet street in a fairly substantial terraced house. The row looks out on a green space filled with trees, to the rear of which are the westward slopes of the valley. When I got home, my next-door neighbour, a mechanic by the name of Justin, was standing in the street, apparently on the lookout for something. A brief discussion followed, in which he spoke of his dog's agitation at the presence of a large rat in the front yard. "Did you see it yourself?" I asked. "Caught a glimpse," he said. "Bit pale for a rat, but I'm not sure what else it could have been." I went inside. I didn't like the sound of a big old rat frequenting the yards. My thoughts returned to the yelping critters of my dreams, tiny beasts with matted fur and sharp, protruding teeth. I shuddered and went about the business of locking up, eagerly awaiting Rosie's arrival. It was just after 7 p.m. when she turned up. I let her in and we went into the kitchen for a drink. She asked again about what I'd seen the night before, and so I told her, leaving nothing out. I agreed to take her up there in the morning, to survey the two lads in the cold light of day. It occurred to us both that, like lightning, the flash might have left some sort of trace behind. We drifted into the dining room, each of us carrying a mug of tea, and were about to sit at the table when Rosie asked, "What's that?" I turned to discover that her gaze had landed on the CCTV monitor in the corner of the room. As my profession dictates, I'm a proponent of home security, and have a camera mounted above the front door. Narrow Valley might be a quiet part of Bolton, but you can never be too careful. I approached the monitor and saw what Rosie was seeing. It's a black and white display, and doesn't perform particularly well in the dark, but aided by the streetlights outside, you see enough. Just a foot or so from the door was a pale, pudgy creature. Probably the rat described by Justin was my first thought. This rodent, or whatever it was up on its short hind legs, smelling the air. "I think it's a rat," I said. "A rat?" Rosie objected. "It's bloody big for a rat." We leaned forward to get a better look at the thing. "Does it look bold to you?" Rosie went on, frowning. I shrugged my shoulders. "I don't know, but look at its face," I said. "It's flat. You're right, there's no way that's a rat." The picture quality was too poor to be sure of anything, but I think we both decided there and then that there was no chance in hell we were going outside to look at the thing in the flesh. A few moments later, the pale creature got down on all fours and scurried away. A series of barks followed from next door. It seemed Jolly the bulldog had caught sight of his quarry again. Rosie and I, not sure what to make of it, were in for another restless night. 3. Boxing Day. The two of us were up bright and early on the 26th. It was set to be a cool, clear day, so we munched our way through half a loaf of toast and made plans to hike to Crooked Edge Hill. I have to admit, my eyes were peeled the whole way. Daytime, as I've come to realize, offers only the illusion of safety. I had no desire to fall prey to that rat thing. 40 minutes later, just after 9, Rosie and I were standing between the two lads, the chill of the moor whistling in our ears. A few dog walkers could be seen in the distance, taking the service road in the direction of the mast, but we had Crooked Edge Hill to ourselves. I tried to retrace my steps, to recall precisely where I'd been standing when that bizarre flash had startled me. Not an easy task in the contrasting daylight, but after several minutes I was reasonably sure I'd managed it. From that point of indistinct grass, Rosie and I descended the hill a little, moving north towards the mast. At a spot down the hill where two rough trails intersected, I saw an area of flattened moor grass, some 3 feet in diameter. It was a subtle depression, the kind of thing you just wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't been looking for it. But there was nothing telling about it, no ground scorch the likes of which you might associate with lightning. However, there was an atmosphere, a sense that something was amiss. Rosie felt it too. Centuries of strange stories seemed to converge on that spot, willing us to believe in all that had been whispered about the moor. Looking out across Winter Hill, calm and innocuous under clear blue skies, it was difficult to believe that such remarkably abnormal and tragic tales could be linked to it. But that's often the way with such places, isn't it? Sometimes you just get a feeling. Fear of the deep woods, terror of the dark waters. We should trust those instincts. I sure as hell wish I'd trusted mine. Uncovering nothing else of note, Rosie and I set off on our return journey to Narrow Valley. And here's where things start to get really effing strange. We'd reached the village, and were turning onto Chapel Lane, my street, when Rosie abruptly grabbed my arm. She'd caught sight of something ahead of us, something that I quickly realized was very much out of the ordinary. Mercifully, it had its back to us, But it was clear to see, even at a distance of 50 feet or so, that this thing, like the rat thing that had disturbed us the night before, was a pale quadruped, trailing the curb, sniffing it like a dog. But it wasn't a dog. It was too big, too limber, and it was bald from head to toe, sporting the insipid flesh of a troglodyte. "Is it the thing from last night?" Rosie whispered nervously. "No way," I said. "It's twice the size at least. Look at it." And on it went, inhaling the curb, its pallid head, a weirdly humanoid head at that, bobbing back and forth periodically. We were downwind of the thing, thank God, so were able to sneak towards it, matching its pace, impatiently seeking the safety of number 7. But as we reached the wall at the front of the house, the creature turned its flat face towards us, opened an oddly wide mouth as if to howl, and darted forward at speed. We flew for the front door. I pulled the key out and fumbled with it clumsily. We could hear the sound of bold paws slapping on the cobbles as the thing closed in on us. The door yielded, and we were through it in a matter of nanoseconds. I threw the door closed and double-bolted it. Rosie and I, panting like a pair of spent sprinters, rushed through to the dining room and stood in front of the CCTV monitor, eager to see what the thing outside was going to do next. And what we saw there shocked us. It wasn't a creature on all fours that met our gaze. It was a hairless human being, a regular action figure without his clothes, I thought in a moment of weird humour. And it was just standing there, entirely motionless, directly below the camera, its dark eyes glued to the front door. "What the hell is going on here?" Rosie blurted. "Who is that?" I had no answer for her. I shook my head involuntarily. Something very odd was going on, but I hadn't a clue where to begin in trying to offer an explanation. Had that thing that chased us been nothing more than a human being down on his hands and knees? It seemed to me that these things were two entirely different entities, the former clearly an animal, the latter distinctly human. We stood there for a good 5 minutes, just watching the stranger, and in that whole time it didn't so much as budge an inch. It might well have been an action figure after all. But then, quite suddenly, it turned on the spot and wandered off, vacating the eye of the camera. My sister and I were dumbfounded. "What if it's still out there?" Rosie pondered. "It probably is still out there," I said. "It has something to do with what I saw on Christmas Eve, I know it." "You think it's the same thing we saw in the yard last night?" "What else could it be? Unless there are a dozen pale rats, dogs, and naked men running around out there." Just then we heard Jolly the bulldog barking again next door. "Come on," I said, leading Rosie back to the front door. "You're not seriously thinking about going out there, are you?" she asked. She had a point. Instead, we went into the living room and peered through the curtains. Justin was out front with Jolly. Evidently the dog had seen something. "Come on," I said again, this time unlocking the front door as I reached it. "Jesus, Rome," Rosie sighed, bracing herself. "It's okay," I said. "Justin's out there with Jolly." And out we went, with caution. "Has Jolly seen that rat again?" I asked, approaching my neighbour and his dog. "I don't know," Justin returned. "Something's got him riled, though." Jolly, the poor lad, was trembling. His mouth was wide open, and he was panting like mad. "What have you seen, boy?" I asked. But the bulldog simply whined, looking half his size in that moment. "There was someone out here," I said to Justin. "A weird-looking chap, naked as the day he was born." "What?" Justin blurted. I could tell instantly that he thought I was on the wind-up. "I'm serious," I went on, pointing at the camera above the door. "Standing right there under the camera." Justin looked to Rosie for some sort of confirmation. Can't blame him, really. I have, or had, one of those rubber faces that lends itself quite well to comedy. Rosie, on the other hand, is more of the firm-faced Frank type. "It's true," she said, backing me up as I knew she would. "Christ," Justin murmured. No wonder Jolly's upset. Probably best if we all head back inside for now, mate, I said. Justin nodded. Whether he complied because he believed us or because he just wanted to get away from us, I'm not sure. Not that it matters. Soon enough, we were all indoors. But something was wrong. There was a breeze blowing through from the back of the house. "The back door," I breathed. With some trepidation, I pushed in front of Rosie and inched towards the kitchen by way of the decent-length corridor that runs through the house. If somebody had smashed their way in while we were outside, they'd done a grand job of stowing themselves away somewhere. You could have heard a pin drop as we went. The house was soaked in silence. The back door was indeed open. How it had been opened is a question I still can't answer, though I have my suspicions. Perhaps I'd just left it unlocked, but I find that very hard to believe considering how vulnerable I'd felt those previous few nights. Nevertheless, Rosie and I were filled from head to toe with the creeping and horrible notion that somebody was in the house, and not just anybody. That pale figure that had been standing at the front door moments before. I closed the door, locked it, double-bolted it. Then it was to the nasty business of checking the rooms one by one. We visited the dining room and the living room. Empty. The downstairs toilet and the study. Empty. Was this just silly paranoia we were experiencing? We made our way upstairs, me up front, visiting first the bathroom, then the guest bedroom. Empty. The box room. Empty. And then the master bedroom. Not empty. Standing at the foot of the bed, seemingly taller than ever, eye to eye with myself at over 6 feet in height, was the pale, hairless man. I froze on the spot. I was unable to move. Rosie gasped and took off at a run to call, as I later discovered, the police. My thoughts were a jumble. The stranger before me was still and silent, looking right at me, right into me, as though trying to calculate the nature of my being. Was he breathing? I couldn't tell. His chest appeared to be rising and falling, but so minimally that it was difficult to know for sure. It was like coming face to face with a shop mannequin, but one with living, searching eyes, black, undefined orbs that were akin to bottomless wells. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the intruder. Minutes, hours. It wouldn't have made a difference. I was consumed by the moment, lost in the strangeness of it all, confused by the motivations of this unfinished piece of sculpture. The only thing I was really conscious of was the man's continuously changing state. Before my fixed gaze, his pastel skin appeared to darken somewhat. A penis and testicles formed between his legs. His facial features sharpened, raising his brow, hollowing his cheeks. Then, as his lips, still colourless but fuller now, began to curl up in a smile, the trance-like state into which I'd been plunged was disturbed by the arrival of several heavy-handed police officers, each of whom raced into the room like a herd of stampeding bulls and forced the naked man to the ground. And as he hit the floor, the abnormal figure emitted a faint but distinct yelp. 4. The Dream. I have to admit my recollections of the police officers escorting the naked man from my house are poor, but I do remember the general impression of multiple faces filled with surprise at the sight and state of the intruder. And I recall with perfect clarity the man's face as he was led past me. Sans the hair, it was my face that looked back at me. I don't think the arresting officers noticed at the time. That would come later. Shortly afterwards, safe in the knowledge that the stranger was locked up in the back of a van outside, I found myself next to Rosie in the living room, answering questions. Do you know the intruder? No. Have you ever seen him before? No. Do you keep anything of value in the house? Not really. Is there anything you can tell us that might assist us in the interrogation of the suspect? I'm sorry, no. I sure as hell wasn't about to tell the police that I'd witnessed a sort of metamorphosis upstairs, if my eyes and senses hadn't deceived me, that was. After all, the room had been dark. The stranger was backlit. But I've mentioned instincts already, haven't I? If we choose to trust those, then we should absolutely choose to accept what we see with our own eyes, no matter how anomalous or implausible. Shouldn't we? Rosie was utterly perplexed. She too had seen the man's face as he was led through the house. The resemblance was undeniable. Her eyes were heavy. This due to the fact, and I learned this later, that she'd watched the transformation of the intruder through a crack in my bedroom door. I mean, what else could she do while waiting for the police to arrive? And things would only get stranger. "Thanks for your time, Mr. Smith," said one of the two officers as they prepared to leave. "We'll be in touch in the morning." Rosie and I followed the officers to the door, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man in the back of the van. Unfortunately, or fortunately as the case may be, there were no windows to provide such a glimpse. But I knew he was out there, sitting silently, breathing imperceptibly, and that alone was enough to induce a shudder. Instinctively, we hobbled to the kitchen. Caffeine was required. With the French press on the go, Rosie and I stood there, leaning against the units, as we often did when waiting for coffee to brew. My sister's a couple of years younger than me, just about able to say she's still in her 20s. She's tall for a lass, stands almost toe-to-toe with me. Just over 6 feet she is. It's funny, growing up I never really saw her as a girl. We were a conniving duo, close enough in age to establish the kind of kinship that would lead to trouble if boredom ever reared its ugly head. In fact, it was often Rosie who would devise the devious plots for which we'd later feel my parents' wrath, light though that wrath usually was. The point is, she's the type of ballsy, level-headed individual you want on your side when the shit hits the fan. She takes the hits and gives it to you straight. "So," she said, when at last the brewed coffee hit the bottom of our mugs, "what the fuck?" I let out an involuntary snigger and downed a mouthful of piping hot coffee. "I'm baffled," I said, shaking my head. Then I told her as best I could what happened after she went to call the police, filling in the bits she'd missed before returning to the bedroom door. The way the man, if man he was, had gawped at me like one starved for a month, holding me in a trance while he worked me out, copied me, in effect. Because that was what it felt like a painter studying his subject, a photographer focusing his lens. I was rambling, trying to find an accurate way to describe the experience, to effectively communicate to my sister the extraordinary nature of it. "So it's a shapeshifter then," she said, and she meant it. She wasn't one to mince words. "Yeah," I said, shrugging my shoulders. "I mean, if it looks like a dog and barks like a dog, then it must be a dog," Rosie finished. "It was a dog when we saw it on the street." And then I thought about what Justin next door had said, his description of the pale rat he'd seen in the front yard. It was a rat before that, near as damn it anyway. We talked for a while longer, going over the same things again and again. In the end, our theory was that whatever the thing might be, it had come down from Winter Hill, right after the flash that had illuminated the moor. Somehow, it had followed me, tracked me down, probably encountered some sort of rodent on the way. Later, Jolly the bulldog. Then... "And now it's in police custody," Rosie said, matter-of-factly. Somehow, the idea of my look-alike banged up at Astley Bridge Police Station made me incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, it wasn't me in there, and yet a bombardment of ambiguous thoughts regarding a sort of metaphysical betrayal were at the forefront of my mind. I felt guilty. How ridiculous is that? It was approaching midnight when we called it a day. High on caffeine and a few other choice substances, I knew that sleep wouldn't be forthcoming. and after what had happened in my bedroom, there was no chance I was spending the night in there. So it was on the couch in the living room, which wasn't quite long enough for my height, that I found myself tossing and turning at around 12:30 a.m. I couldn't shake the vision of that appalling intruder. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him glaring at me, burrowing into my soul. I saw those impossibly malleable limbs achieve greater definition, the advent of pale genitalia, the subtle contortions of that awful elastic face. And then I was outside. It was dark. I was striding through the moor grass, struggling with my footing. I looked up, aware that something was about to happen. A column of light, some 50 feet in diameter, briefly illuminated the night sky, depositing at its base a strange, writhing mass. Blindly, I groped my way towards the thing, my eyes drawn to a wriggling shadow in the near blackness. And as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw. The squirming monstrosity, the size of a large rat, was little more than a squat fetus. It had a familiar face. It was my face. The thing was a mockingly sinister miniature of myself. It looked at me with its steely black eyes, just as the man in my bedroom had looked at me, and I was glued to the spot, transfixed by it, my head filled with a terrible mixture of interest and repulsion. And then there was a second flash of light, depositing a second squirming horror. This too looked like me, and alongside its ghastly companion, the two of them, led by the first, came after me. I took off running, stumbling, falling, hearing repetitions of that awful yelp that had signalled the arrival of the thing in the waking world. And then, as is often the case in dreams, I found myself transported to the Zark, that unnavigable expanse shunned by all sensible ramblers. I was up to my knees in the festering bogs, gasping for breath, but the things were still at my heels, those and others, salivating, chomping, relentless. I could barely move, wading through the swamp with extreme difficulty. And those hungry horrors got closer and closer, till one of them took a piece out of me, and then another, and another, and... I woke up. I was dripping with sweat. Just a dream, I thought. A horrible nightmare. It's a shame the same couldn't be said about what had happened earlier, in my bedroom. 5. December 27th. Rosie and I were in the dining room when the call came in, eating a light breakfast. We'd both slept terribly, as evidenced by the nightmare I'd had, and the similarly awful visions that had apparently plagued my sister's dreams. Rats had been after her, she said. Great big rats with glowing white eyes. Caffeine once again had been our remedy, served in the form of strong black coffee. As expected, it was a call from the police at Astley Bridge, but it wasn't one of the arresting officers we dealt with the night before. The lady introduced herself as Inspector Lily Thompson, and was calling not to ask follow-up questions, but to inform Rosie and myself of a troubling development concerning the suspect. "What happened?" I asked nervously. Rosie was at my side in a heartbeat, trying to listen in by the earpiece. "There's only so much I can tell you, Mr. Smith," Thompson said. "Suffice it to say that our unknown male has escaped. This, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is a deeply worrying matter, and we must take your safety into consideration in dealing with the suspect's recapture." "You think he's a threat to me?" "The suspect was arrested in your home, meaning that by duty of care, we're obliged to inform you of his escape." You never get a straight answer from the police, though I was at least grateful they contacted me to give me the heads up. Rosie grabbed the phone. "Hello, this is Rosie, Roman's sister. Should we be expecting that man to come back here?" "That," Thompson said, "I can't say. We will, however, be keeping an eye on Chapel Lane. There's a car on its way to you as we speak. Try to go about your business as normal." Rosie laughed at this, which was a good opportunity for me to snatch the phone back. Thanks, Inspector. Is there anything else we need to know? Not right now, but I promise I'll keep you updated. The inspector seemed pleasant enough, given the circumstances, but it was clear to me, even over the telephone, that the man's escape was fraught with troubling details, and that it wasn't the kind of thing your average copper dealt with very often, if ever. At 9:30 a.m., I think it was, the patrol car arrived, and from it came one of the arresting officers from the night before, Constable Bruce Milne. I invited him in. He had a look around the house, checked the doors and windows, then joined Rosie and me for a cup of tea. I could tell from the look on his face that he was a man divided. There was so much he clearly wanted to say, but was forced to tamp down due to his professional commitments. I respected him for that, but I also respected him for what he was able to reveal. "I wanted to get another look at you," he said to me. "That fella looks just like you. Exactly like you, in fact. Now, let's get this long-lost sibling thing out of the way," he went on, addressing both of us. "The birth register shows that the pair of you are the only registered offspring of David and Elizabeth Smith. Is this a fair statement?" Rosie and I nodded. The hairs at the back of my neck were standing on end. "Is there anything you can tell us about what happened when you took him in last night?" I asked. "I can tell you that he's a quiet man. Didn't say a word, at least to me anyway. Showed no signs of resistance. Very compliant. The last time I laid eyes on him, he was sitting comfortably in a cell, clothed, with a mound of hair on top of his head, just like yours." I leaned forward. "Hair? Hadn't a hair on him last night." That was my observation too. Milne sat there silently for several moments. I could see, despite the mask of neutrality he wore, that the constable was profoundly baffled by the strangeness of it all. He sipped at his tea quietly, his eyes continually drawn to mine, as if for the benefit of his sanity. After a while, a discussion followed concerning general safety, instructions pertaining to the checking and rechecking of bolts and locks, being mindful when out and about in sparsely populated areas, keeping the CCTV in good working order, etc. I was happy with all that. Because the suspect hadn't displayed violent tendencies, the patrol car wouldn't be stationed on Chapel Lane indefinitely, and as such, Milne said he and other officers would come and go sporadically until the suspect was located. Looking back, I suppose I wasn't really afraid of the stranger. During my brief encounter with him, it hadn't felt like he was out to get me. There was something else at work, and as Milne returned to the patrol car, Rosie and I began to think about what that something might be. You'd think that having the police involved would have taken the edge off my concerns, but bewildered as they were, with an escaped suspect on their hands, it only served to fuel my imagination. Who or what was this mysterious stranger? What was his or its nature? Again, Rosie and I mused over the old stories. There are tales of people coming down from the moor in the past, people, some say, whose identities are impossible to determine. Rosie reminded me of a story involving a man who was said to have ended up in a psychiatric facility after having wandered out of a Winter Hill snowstorm in a state of delirium. Rumour has it that this man was attacked up there, had the scars to prove it, but of course serious inquiries as to the whereabouts of this person invariably lead to dead ends. As far as we could both determine, though, there were no stories about shape-shifting critters arriving via columns of light. Or were there? That's the trouble with folklore. If you want the real deal, you can forget it. Only the tightest of communities are in possession of anything worth knowing. Communities that have experienced things en masse. But you won't get anything out of them because they've sworn oaths of secrecy. They say this about the village of Felmont, a quiet spot not too far from here. But I've already mentioned the rumours regarding that lot, and it won't do any good to go over it again and again here. The day seemed to whip by as Rosie and I talked. I don't think we'd budged from our positions on the sofa in over 3 hours, and then we heard the rumble of an engine outside. My first thought was that Milne had returned, doing his rounds, but a peek through the closed curtains revealed our first glimpse of the car I mentioned at the very beginning of this account, the Silver Vento with tinted windows. Rosie's not a big car person, so to her it was just another hunk of metal concealing a very, and I mean very, noisy engine. But somehow I recognised the model. With no driver visible, we didn't really know what to make of it. I had visions of my doppelganger emerging, back to finish whatever it was he had started. But the driver's side door remained closed. "What do you think?" I asked vaguely. "I don't know," Rosie replied, taking another sneaky look through the curtains. "Do you think it's here for us?" I went on. "Could be an unmarked patrol car." "Could be," I said, frowning. "Do you want to head out there and find out?" Of course she didn't. And I think we both knew it wasn't a patrol car. Not a police patrol car, anyway. At approximately 7 p.m., we heard the unmistakable sound of a car moving off. We went to the window and were just in time to see, under the glow of the streetlight in front of the house, Milne's patrol car in the act of parking. The constable was a large chap with a black mullet and a fair old beard, easily recognisable sitting in the driver's seat. His arrival, apparently, had precipitated the departure of the Vento. Curious. 6. The Silver Vento. The following morning, I received a call from my dad, who had the unpleasant job of delivering bad news. Neil Miller, 27, husband of Lucy and a close friend of my sister, had passed away in the night, of no apparent cause. The young man's heart just stopped beating. Rosie was understandably upset, and after a brief discussion she took the decision to head over to Lucy's to provide some much-needed emotional support. I told her not to worry about me. After all, I said, I was under the watchful eye of the police. "What about that weird car?" she asked. "If it comes back," I said, "I'll have a word with the constable." Rosie, still shaken, promised to call later on, and set off for Lucy's place in Farmouth. The rest of that morning was just odd. I heard Jolly barking through the wall on a couple of occasions, which immediately took my mind back to the initial sighting of the thing that would eventually mutate into my spitting image. But that took me back to an earlier train of thought that I hadn't properly explored. What if those other things that I had seen, the pale rat, the sniffing dog, were not iterations of what I'd encountered in my bedroom on Boxing Day? What if those critters were entirely separate entities, each of them still out there on the prowl, disturbing Justin's bulldog from time to time? Truth be told, I didn't know what to think. The involvement of the police had forced me to put my foot on the brake, as it were. It had prevented me from going out and doing my own investigation. With that in mind, haunted by the silence of the house, I decided to head out to the shop. A look in the fridge revealed I was lacking a few items, so what better way to gain perspective than by taking a leisurely 50-minute walk to the local supermarket? But there was nothing leisurely about it. Descending Chapel Lane, I couldn't stop myself from glaring into the yards of my neighbours, expecting to see pale rodents lurking there. Numerous nervous glances towards the wooded slopes of the valley revealed nothing but tree trunks and spindly bare branches, but my mind's eye saw dog-like things and naked mannequin men. And when I reached Chorley Old Road, the main route down to Orwich, dusted as it was by the lightest sprinkling of snow, I immediately caught sight of a Silver Vento with tinted windows. The Silver Vento with tinted windows. It was parked off-road on a patch of rough ground, looking, as I imagined to the majority of passers-by, quite inconspicuous. But to me it was incredibly unnerving. Again, its bloated engine was ticking over, producing that horrible, whirring racket. I tried to pay it as little mind as possible, pacing on in the direction of Orwich, my head in the clouds. And when, finally, I found the nerve to squint over my shoulder, I saw that it remained in exactly the same spot. Perhaps the car had nothing to do with me after all. Probably an undercover operative, I said to myself, on a case completely unrelated to my run-in with that shape-shifting gentleman. I pressed on. I reached the supermarket, did my shopping, stuffed the much-needed items into my backpack, and stepped back out into the cold. And cold it was by now. The snow was falling again, bringing with it that proper winter chill that characterizes the season. But I climbed Chorley Old Road with a developing sense of dread. I knew that that silver car was still going to be there, parked on that bit of rough ground, its engine ticking over ceaselessly. And it wasn't long before I could see it up ahead of me, pumping clouds of noxious fumes into the brisk air. It has a personality of its own, that car. And I use the present tense because, just as I stated earlier, it's outside the house right now, driving the neighbours barmy. But that's jumping the gun. As I say, it has a personality of its own. And as I approached it off Chorley Old Road, it leered at me like a metal monster, suggestive of a hungry polar bear on the Arctic ice, primed to pounce. The crap oozing from the exhaust formed strange shapes in the air above it, indicative of ghostly fingers, pointing, prodding, accusing. But once again I passed the car without incident. That is, until I began to climb Peter's Lane in the direction of the village. The grey monster came to life, roaring as it manoeuvred onto the road proper, and began to follow me along the lane at a not-so-discreet distance. Was it following me? Or was this just another coincidence? I decided to find out, but not straight off. I reached the edge of Narrow Valley and made my way up Match Lane towards the old church at the junction of Match and Chapel. Once there, I ducked into the graveyard, reasonably sure that the driver of the car, whoever or whatever that might be, saw me do so. The church has been abandoned for some years. I can't even tell you what it's called, despite the fact that I've heard a dozen or so neighbours refer to it by name over the years, and so the overgrown graveyard, I thought, would be quite the convenient location for a bit of hide-and-seek. Though my backpack made it difficult, I managed to squeeze myself into a spot between two stones, shrouded by holly, and with a good view of the road. I waited there for a few minutes, before the rumble of the Vento announced the arrival of my would-be pursuer. The car pulled over, and the hidden driver killed the engine. Moments later, the driver's side door opened, and, from my vantage point looking towards the front of the vehicle, I caught sight of a pair of tidy-looking black shoes, contrasting starkly with the snow-dusted streets. And then the figure they belonged to emerged from the vehicle. This was an odd-looking character altogether, a very tall and dark-suited, androgynous-looking figure, with long arms like a monkey's. As the person stepped away from the car, I saw that he or she moved with great difficulty, almost as though these were his or her first steps. And then the figure, whose pale face I could now partially see, mostly hidden by a pair of black sunglasses and a brimmed hat, hesitated next to the small wall that borders the graveyard. I'd hazard that he or she looked perplexed by the wall, encountering seemingly an insurmountable obstacle. And just like that, the person turned and inched his or her way back to the car, clambering in with much ado. Seconds later, the car started up again, and off it went, ending up who knows where. I remained in my hiding place for several minutes, thoroughly spooked. I'd never seen anybody like that in my life. The sight of that otherworldly figure really got under my skin. I was reminded of those old mysteries, like the Solway Spaceman, in which an average Joe catches a glimpse of something beyond their reckoning and is later visited by peculiar, almost inhuman men in suits who ask endless questions, then abruptly take off, never to be heard from again, but whose presence is felt at times in various unsettling forms. I didn't like it one bit. Would I be under constant surveillance from now on? I fled home, giving the contents of my backpack a thoroughly good shaking up along the way. Fuck it, I muttered to myself as I slipped in through the back door. I'm going nowhere for a while. 7. The phone calls. The days that followed were like an unbroken dream. I didn't so much as open a window, kept the curtains closed, and spent most of each day peeking through them at the quiet street outside. The Vento came and went, as did the constable's patrol car, but from neither did anyone emerge. I thought a lot about the driver of the silver car, the oddball in the dark suit. I couldn't shake the idea of the proverbial man in black, a watcher sent to observe my comings and goings. But why? Was there a connection between that otherworldly figure and the thing that had took on my likeness? I wanted to find out, but equally I wanted to forget. I chose to concentrate on the day-to-day, and it wasn't long before the cabin fever kicked in. Have you ever been in such a situation? Stuck indoors for days on end, completely alone, and not because you're sick or recovering from a broken leg, but because you haven't a clue what else to do. I've been called a workaholic on more than one occasion, and I'm sure I could have gone out on a job or two during that time, but with the idea of being watched day and night bearing down on me by both the police and that anonymous agent, I just couldn't face it. My meals consisted of tins of bland soup and beans on toast, supplemented by frequent mugs of tea and coffee. No wonder I was crawling the walls after 24 hours. Rosie called every day, expressing her desire to return as soon as possible. This I discouraged, insisting that I was absolutely fine, content to just stay indoors and keep myself to myself. Of course, I was lying, but she didn't need to know that. It wasn't her fault I'd stumbled into this thing. A call from Inspector Thompson came through on the 29th, I think it was. She asked about my CCTV, whether or not recordings had been made the night the suspect had entered the house. Unfortunately, the VCR hadn't been running, which, looking back, had been a bit of an oversight on my part, especially after what Rosie and I had seen on the monitor on Christmas Day. They were no closer to locating the suspect, she said. No sightings of anybody matching the man's description had been reported, which, given the fact that the man they sought bore a striking resemblance to myself, made me even more determined to stay indoors and out of sight. My solitude continued, tweaking curtains and watching television. What a drag it was. And then the calls. For context, the main telephone is in the dining room, so whenever a call comes through, it takes me a few seconds to get to it from the living room. And that's if I'm motivated to get to it at speed. The first call came in around late afternoon on New Year's Eve. I assumed it was my sister calling, or possibly my parents, so I didn't answer it in a hurry. But when, after a good minute or so, I finally picked up the handset, I found that it wasn't Rosie, nor was it my mum or dad. It was a silent caller, who apparently had nothing to say in response to my repeated hellos. I held the earpiece very close to my head and listened carefully. Not a sound. I hung up. I was about to call 1471 to determine the number of the caller when the phone rang again. I answered it. "Hello? Hello?" a strange voice echoed. "Can I help you?" I said, sensing that something was amiss. "Can I help you?" the voice repeated. There was, and I know this sounds odd, a mechanical edge to the voice, a kind of gurgling quality, as though the voice was being passed through an electronic phaser or something. "Who is this?" I went on. "Who is this?" Again, the caller simply repeated my words. I hung up again, and this time dialed 1471 immediately, in order to make a note of the caller's number, if, that is, the caller hadn't withheld it. But I was in luck. The caller hadn't withheld the number, and furthermore I recognized the number. It belonged to a phone box at the north end of Chapel Lane, a mere stone's throw from my door. As to how I recognised it, well, several months earlier, myself, Justin next door, and a couple of other neighbours, Cully and Anne at number 10, had called each other from the phone box in an effort to confirm a fault on the telephone line. It's funny how these things work out. If it hadn't been for that trouble in September, I wouldn't have known the caller's location, which might well have been for the best, considering how things turned out. But there's no point dwelling on that now. It is what it is. The moment I replaced the handset, the phone rang a third time. I answered it, an idea developing in my mind. "Hello?" I said again. And this time, instead of repeating my words, the voice, for of course it was the same caller, went off on a random prattle. "Can I help you? Marvellous, marvellous. Can I help you? Marvellous." The caller said marvellous an awful lot. Just thinking about it now makes my raw skin crawl. "What do you want?" I asked, reaching for my coat and scarf. "Who is this? Marvellous. Hello? Marvellous. Who is this?" I managed to slip my boots on, then asked, "Why do you keep calling me? What do you want? Marvellous, marvellous." Dressed for the cold evening ahead, I left the handset hanging by its cord, the voice babbling away, and went for the back door. I crept through the garden and stepped into the shadowy ginnel that runs parallel with the row. I followed the ginnel to the north and emerged at the top of Chapel Lane, moving covertly in the direction of the phone box that would hopefully still contain my prank caller. Standing just out of sight, peering from the relative shelter of an old tree, I laid my eyes on the red kiosk. What I saw there shocked me, for it wasn't just the fact that I was looking at my exact double, speaking into the handset, a blank look on his face, but also the fact that the man was wearing precisely the same clothes I was wearing, from the plain tan scarf and black duffel coat to the stonewashed jeans and mahogany hiking boots. I stood there for a few seconds, shaking my head in astonishment. This was him, the escaped suspect, the thing that had taken shape in my bedroom just a few days ago, and now he was calling me, over and over again, in an effort to achieve what exactly? To replicate my voice? Was his purpose to take over my life? Replace me? Did he have help? Someone had to have provided him with my telephone number, Amex directory. Or had he absorbed that information when he looked into my being on Boxing Day? Other questions raced through my mind, but I couldn't consider them, because just then the man who was me hung up the phone and exited the kiosk, moving off to the north. Even his walk resembled mine. This was my chance, I thought, my chance to get some answers. I followed him. It was easy enough to maintain a safe distance, as a recent dusting of snow recorded his steps, and that was strange enough in itself, the way my footprints just slipped into his effortlessly. We trod on in the twilight, climbing ever higher towards Winter Hill. The clouds above were tinged with a pinkish hue, filled with the promise of further snowfall. I was a considerable distance behind now. The idea of alerting him to my presence was something I just couldn't handle. And not once did I see another soul, nor did additional footprints in the snow betray the presence of a dog walker or the meandering tread of a New Year's Eve celebrant. My double never looked back, seemed incapable of any action other than that of forward progression. He had somewhere to be, I was sure of it, and I was determined to find out where that was. My sense of self-preservation had taken a back seat for the time being. Why was that? I hadn't been a risk-taker before. I'd always been happy to play the game and just get by. But the strangeness of it all, that had to be the straw that broke the camel's back. I saw the two lads on the horizon and knew that we were heading back to where it had all started, perhaps to that curious patch of flattened moor grass Rosie and I had discovered on Boxing Day. Up the old service road we went, up onto the chilly flats of the moor proper, then veered west towards Crooked Edge Hill. The icy winds blowing from the north were biting, coupled now with flurries of snow. The weather had changed in an instant, punishing me for my boldness. Visibility had been reduced dramatically, but I pushed on like a Munson braving the Antarctic wastes. I'd lost sight of my doppelganger in all this, and his footprints were much more difficult to spot, quickly consumed by the blizzard. It was as though the elements had an agenda of their own, to prevent me from reaching my goal. Looking back, I should have read the signs, should have turned around, but I didn't, and I paid the price for my ignorance. Here, my recollections become a little muddled. I remember cresting Crooked Edge Hill, and saw just ahead of me the two lads, a pair of snow-topped cairns. There was a figure between them, obscured by billowing clouds. I went forward, shielding my eyes from the onslaught of flakes, and was about to take cover behind the smaller of the cairns, when once again, without warning, a great flash of light filled my eyes, right above my head this time, and darkness. Eight. The Complex. I felt a bit queasy, dazed by whatever it was I'd been subjected to. It took me a few minutes to gather my senses. My ears were ringing, my eyes were stinging. There was a weird taste in my mouth, like the bitterest licorice you can possibly imagine. My fingers and toes were tingling, like they were thawing out, and my head was killing me. I felt like I'd been hit by a train, for God's sake. I wasn't sure at the time, but I figured I'd blacked out when the light flashed overhead. Either that or I'd been instantaneously transported from Crooked Edge Hill to, well, wherever I'd ended up. I was standing in a long corridor, a dark passage marked out by the occasional light embedded in the ceiling. The space was reminiscent of the kind of concrete-lined tunnel you might find in a military bunker. It was grey and uninviting, but quiet and warm, suggestive of a subterranean location. I looked down at my coat and saw that a layer of fresh snowflakes still clung to my shoulders and upper arms. I slackened my snow-sprinkled scarf and took a moment to reflect. My theory was that I'd followed my double into some sort of hidden facility, a secret base under the moor, from where, in all likelihood, that yelping thing had emerged on Christmas Eve. The flash of light was probably an aspect of some technical process beyond my reckoning, a process by which a door or hatch was opened, permitting entry. Who knows? But there I was, up to my eyeballs in trouble, no doubt. I set off in a straight line, looking, first and foremost, for a way out. It's strange. As a boy, I used to look up at Winter Hill and imagine that the entirety of the moor was nothing more than a skin covering a gargantuan spaceship, a craft that, according to my fancy, had crashed on Earth millions of years ago and had gradually been consumed by the landscape over the ensuing epochs. A silly idea, of course, but not quite so far-fetched as it used to sound, given my present circumstances, if, after all, the tunnel through which I trod was situated in the ground beneath the moor. I walked for a good 10 minutes or so, one tingling step after another, before reaching an opening in the wall to my right. This led to a large chamber, at the centre of which stood a vast, tall vat filled with a yellowish liquid. I didn't like the look of that, so I got out of there quickly. Another 10 minutes, and I came across another opening in the wall to my right. A second chamber yawned before me, like a big old hungry mouth. I heard sounds back there. Pops, clicks, and hisses. More equipment, I thought. Not for my eyes. And on I went along the corridor, till eventually I reached the end of it, where a pair of double doors presented themselves. I pushed them open tentatively, and stepped into the room beyond. This was a much smaller space compared to the chambers I'd seen. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was like the smell of supermarket mints when you remove the plastic packaging. Oh, it was foul. The room itself was very much like your archetypal chemistry lab at school, with rows of benches covered with Bunsen burners, conical flasks, and other paraphernalia. But standing in the corner of the room, by what looked to be a large black door, was another vat, like a smaller version of the one containing the fluid in the first chamber I'd entered. This, it soon became apparent, was the source of the appalling smell. Inside, its bulging hands pressed against the glass, floated a horribly broad, colourless mass of flesh in the shape of something that might have just about passed for humanoid. I don't know how to describe it. To me, it seemed as though a team of insane scientists had been tasked with the job of producing something resembling a human being from offcuts of meat. The thing was truly horrifying to behold, and that smell oozing out of the top of the open vat just seemed to intensify the longer I stood there. What was this place? What kind of experiments had been conducted here? I approached the vat and saw, scattered across a small table to the side of it, a set of handwritten notes jotted down in English, journal style. After reading them, I pocketed them. They give a flavour of what was going on down there. Somehow I made it out with them. So here they are in all their brevity, with redactions denoted as blank. Entry 1, November 2nd, 1991. The hushed corridors of this place hurt my ears, and the weight of responsibility bears down on my shoulders. The fusion of blank is no easy feat, but the pressure to deliver results is immense. The canisters loom in the lab, filled with the promise of unprecedented scientific achievement. I'm consumed by it, at my wit's end with it. What must I do to unlock the potential hidden within these blank genomes? Entry 2, November 13th, 1991. I'm exhausted. We're all exhausted. A relentless whirlwind of blank sequencing, selection, and integration. The delicate dance of human and blank genetic material demands precision, and the stakes are higher than ever. The canisters pulse with potential, every heartbeat a reminder of the expectations placed upon us. My colleagues work diligently, but I feel the burden of time pressing against us, trampling us underfoot. We're on the precipice of greatness or blank. The blank algorithm is proving to be an intricate puzzle. The life forms exhibit glimpses of blank, but refinement is essential. The walls are closing in, and every moment spent fine-tuning feels like a stolen breath. The pressure is palpable, an unrelenting force pushing us towards an elusive breakthrough. The clandestine nature of our work intensifies the burden. We're entrusted with a power that could reshape the blank. Failure is not an option. Entry 3, December 1st, 1991. Blank trials are underway, and the canisters are teeming with activity. And yet, doubt continues to hold me in its inexorable grip. The ethical considerations trouble me greatly, but such things are of no concern to blank. They want what they want, and who am I to argue with them? Besides, there's no going back now. One of them opened its eyes this morning. Blank says it's aware. I don't know. It isn't ready yet. We aren't ready yet. Not for that. No wonder I can't sleep. Haven't slept in days. Entry 4, December 23rd, 1991. Today marks a critical juncture. The life forms have exhibited blank capabilities beyond our initial projections. My elation is tinged with trepidation as we tread into uncharted territory. The pressure, unyielding, lingers in every decision, every calculation. The canisters, once vessels of potential, now seem like chambers of both promise and peril. God help us. Entry 5, January 3rd, 1992. As we embark on long-term stability testing, the blank of our creation weighs on my conscience. The canisters have become both cradle and crucible for these creatures. The pressure to prove the viability of our experiment, to meet the expectations of those who watch from the shadows, is relentless. The balance between scientific curiosity and ethical responsibility becomes more precarious with each passing day. But what else can we do? We must continue our work, continue diligently, until success or blank. My fingertips hurt. I didn't know what to make of the notes at the time. Those frustrating redactions conceal vital information. But now, on reflection, I think I can fill in the blanks. But that'll come later. Eager to be out of that grisly place, the distress of that unnamed scientist almost palpable in the fetid air, I approached the black door next to the nauseous vat, holding my nose as I went. But on closer inspection, I found that it was no ordinary door. Yes, it stood vertically as a door tends to stand, but the opening was simply a void black rectangle, beyond which nothing whatsoever could be seen. Was this what it was like to stand at the event horizon of a black hole? And then, impelled by a force I couldn't reconcile, I stepped through it. 9. Monochrome Valley. That's it, I thought. I'm out. I can't explain it. I'll never be able to explain it. But stepping through that portal was akin to an embrace by the velvety void itself. Transfer is the word I'll use. I was transferred from one point to another, and that new point, as far as I could tell, was the bleak yet familiar plain of Winter Hill, under a blanket of pristine snow. Where had I been? Was that facility through which I'd wandered really beneath my feet, or somewhere else, somewhere beyond my comprehension? I studied my surroundings minutely. I was standing on the service road, about halfway between the mast and Crooked Edge Hill. I'd never seen such a perfectly grayscale landscape. The tubular mast and the snowscape were a bright polar white, whereas the road, swept clear of the white stuff by persons unknown, and the cloudy skies above were of a deep, dark grey, like torched tree bark. Even the aircraft warning lights affixed to the mast, previously red, now shone a soft, silvery light. It was so silent and still that I was afraid to move, afraid to disturb what to me felt like the most sacred solitude. I'm not a religious man by any means, but that's the only way I can describe it. I was moved by that scene, abnormal though it was. But it wasn't right at all. I took off southward, keen to return to the safety of home. As I went, I made curious observations that bothered me. The two lads as I passed them seemed closer to the road than normal, or perhaps they were just a little larger. The service road itself seemed narrower, and I could have sworn it was less precipitous, descending at a much gentler gradient than I was familiar with. I looked out across the expansive vista to the south, saw the flickering lights of many towns and villages, but these were less numerous than they should have been. What had happened to the mighty glow of Liverpool? True, too, that I seemed to reach the edge of Narrow Valley in record time. And though I couldn't put my finger on anything in particular, it seemed as though certain footpaths were that much tighter, and certain streets that much shorter, like the distance between the village and Winter Hill had been truncated somehow. As I entered the village proper, I was disturbed by the monochromatic streets, cars, and houses. Had the world been inexplicably rendered in black and white, or had something happened to my vision? My muscles ached as I reached Chapel Lane, desperate now for those home comforts. I passed Justin's house next door and saw Jolly in the window. He too appeared to be made up of just one colour, but the grey boy didn't move. I didn't see his tail wag as it usually did when I passed by. I saw no sign of the constable's patrol car, nor did I see, and for this I was thankful, that grim Vento. I limped up the path, quite exhausted by now, and fumbled for the house keys. Damn, I wasn't carrying them. Must have dropped them, I thought. Lost them during whatever had happened to me at Winter Hill. But then I looked at the door more closely and saw that the keyhole was missing, like there had never been one in the first place. I tried the handle, and lo and behold, it was open. I scratched my head in confusion. I literally scratched my head, gawping at the grey door that should have been green, completely baffled by the entire situation. Should I check on Justin, I thought. How about Amiri at number 6 or Mr. Nash at number 2? I tried all three, but only the latter came to the door, another grey door that should have been red. Nash is an elderly gent, a retired landscape gardener, whose yard, small though it might be, is a sight to behold in spring. He's sprightly for a man in his 80s, always greets you with a toothy smile, and if he's not under the weather, invites you in for a cup of tea at the drop of a hat. But that night, that horrible, horrible night, I shuddered when I caught sight of him at the door. And I didn't know why at first. It was just old Nash, grey-haired and pot-bellied. But the more I looked at him, the more I saw what was causing me trouble. It wasn't only his hair that was grey, it was his face, terribly ashen, like that of a mummified corpse. It was like an automaton stood there, awaiting instructions. I was about to open my mouth to speak, when the old man opened his in that toothy smile I mentioned, revealing pearly white teeth. Perfect pearly white teeth, not the crumbling gnashes that usually dwelt there. And then he went to speak, but no words came out, just a low, gurgling exhalation like the death rattle of a crucified vampire. And then, still smiling, Nash just closed the door. Transaction complete. I turned to leave and saw another set of familiar faces. Franklin Jones and Cody Taylor, a pair of American students living temporarily with Mr. Wilbur at number 13. Each of them wore a grey mask, it seemed, their expressions devoid of humanity, strolling rather awkwardly in the direction of the substation at the bottom of Chapel Lane, where I saw what appeared to be Mr. Wilbur's cat sitting on top of the fence bordering the structure. But I couldn't be sure it was him, because Tarbox, despite the name, was a ginger tabby, not a smoky Persian. Nope, I'd had enough of being out and about. I hobbled back to number 7 and pushed the grey door open. I shuffled inside and bolted the door behind me. At least I had some means of locking up. But as I went around the house, navigating first the downstairs rooms, then the upstairs, I quickly realized that the grey place wasn't my home. Let's put aside the fact that everything within, from the furniture in the living room to the crockery in the kitchen, was black and white, and focus on the fact that, like the world outside, the house was smaller than it was supposed to be, lacking in the personal possessions that made it mine. The house was an impression of my home, just as the world outside was an impression, an incomplete impression at that. I tried to think about it, tried to focus on the problem at hand, but I was just too bloody tired. I'd never felt so wiped out in all my life. I just needed to lie down and sleep for 10 or 11 hours. I'd think about the weirdness later. I'd work it all out much later. I toppled onto the bed in the guest bedroom, a bed that was strangely firm and, of course, grey. And it didn't take long for me to drop off, knackered as I was. But my drifting mind was plagued by memories of recent events, the phone box and the calls, the police and the arrest, the various guises of my strange shadow. A thought lingered on my mind prior to oblivion, a thought concerning my double. Where the hell was he, anyway? 10. Missing time. I have only vague recollections of the period between falling asleep in that grey world and waking on the sofa on the morning of January 3rd in a colourful world, the real world as I now call it. These are the snippets. The earliest memory I have is of being carried out of the grey house, half asleep, and placed in the back of a silver car, a noisy vehicle that just had to be the Vento, or a car just like it. I was driven north as evidenced by the sight of the TV mast I caught glimpses of through the windscreen. I'm pretty sure my captors took the service road, and at some point we left the road and were quickly enveloped by moorgrass and darkness. The next thing I remember is looking up at a sequence of ceiling lights as they passed overhead. Undoubtedly, I'd been returned to the facility under the moor. I was lying flat on my back, aching all over, feeling for all the world like a man approaching death, a shadow of my former self, thrust forward on a firm gurney by hands I couldn't see, taken deeper and deeper into the complex. And then, laid bare in the diffuse lighting of what resembled an operating theatre, faces were peering at me from above, the pale visages of frightening physicians, analysing me, prodding me, poking me, but strangely enough, their actions eliciting no pain. Some time later, after who knows what was done to me in that grim place, I was left to recuperate in a dark room. As I said before, I was so utterly exhausted when I reached the grey house that I could barely stand, and that listlessness persisted as I lay there in the shadows, so much so that I'm unable to say what went through my mind. The physicians came and went, sticking me with needles, measuring my blood pressure, sometimes communicating with one another as they did so. Their faces still haunt me. They'll always haunt me, colourless and empty of expression, gaunt and plain, wide-mouthed and hollow-eyed, ghastly in every respect. And that was about the extent of my recall at the time. The next thing I knew, I was at home, still aching and tired, but surrounded by familiar comforts. I dragged my heavy body from the sofa and looked out of the window. The Silver Vento was parked right outside, its noisy engine ticking over. But knowing that I'd been in the back of that car and had walked away seemingly unscathed, some of the fear dissipated, and I determined to confront the driver there and then. I found my coat and scarf hanging by the telephone in the dining room. My boots had been placed by the front door. I threw these things on, sans the scarf, and stormed out of the front door like a man possessed. But the car moved off the moment my feet touched the flags outside. The driver evidently wasn't prepared to speak to me. "Who is that?" I heard a voice ask. I turned and saw Justin standing in the yard next door, watching the car drive off to the north. "I mentioned it to the officer who was here earlier," he went on, "but she told me to keep away from it, that it's none of my concern." "Christ!" This he added upon making eye contact with me. "What's going on with you, anyway?" "What do you mean?" I asked, innocently enough. "All this business with the police, an intruder. Yeah, I heard it through the grapevine. That bloody car and—" Here he hesitated. "You look like shit." I did my best to form a reassuring smile, then asked, "Did you get the name of the officer?" "Some inspector or other. Sorry, Rome, I can't remember. I was too preoccupied with holding Jolly back. There was something about her that rubbed him up the wrong way. Weird. You know how placid he is." I nodded and took a couple of steps across the yard towards him, but stopped in my tracks as Jolly, the most docile of bulldogs, got up on his hind legs and started barking at me over the party wall. "Jolly!" Justin admonished. "What the hell is this now?" "Sorry, Rome, he's obviously not feeling like himself today." "It's okay, mate," I said loudly. "We'll talk later." I went back inside and stood for a moment by the door, nursing a developing headache. From what Justin had said, Inspector Thompson had paid our quiet street a visit earlier that morning. Why? Was she checking up on me personally? Had Constable Milne become aware of my absence and reported back to her? The timing seemed strange to me. She'd shown up just prior to my waking up after several unexpected days away. And she clearly knew all about the Silver Vento, had warned my neighbour against asking further questions about it. No, I didn't like it one bit. There was something going on, and I, somehow or other, appeared to be at the centre of it. Rosie called that afternoon, and what she had to say only made matters worse. I couldn't get hold of you, she said, so I called the police, spoke directly to Thompson. She said you were fine, that you'd been advised to keep off the phone after receiving a bunch of prank calls. Well, I'll tell you, if you hadn't answered just now, I'd have been driving over. So Thompson knew about the calls, too. I was surprised she hadn't had the line disconnected. But I didn't deny anything. Didn't want to further agitate my sister. I told her all was well and that I'd call her the moment the suspect was recaptured. Again, forgive me, Rose. After saying goodbye to Rosie for the last time, I climbed the stairs wearily and shuffled into the bathroom. I walked up to the mirror and took a good long look at myself. Justin was right. I did look like shit. Worse than shit. I was grey through and through. My eyes were bulging in their sockets with dark, swollen bags under them. My lips were chapped and dull. My hair was dry and straw-like. I looked like death warmed up. And that was 3 days ago. You want to see me now? I'm struggling with the pen. All that jabbering at the beginning has really cost me. Doesn't matter. There isn't much more to write now anyway. 11. Return to the two lads. Had I caught something? Been exposed to something? I'd heard terrible accounts of people exposed to the smallest amounts of radiation who had practically come undone in a relatively short period of time. The idiot that I am, I went after my doppelganger that night without a plan, no preparation. What on earth was I thinking? I should have at least told Rosie. I couldn't trust the police. Well, they were in on it as far as I was concerned. Possibly not at the beginning when my double was arrested, but after that silver car came into the picture, who can say? Nevertheless, 2 days had passed since the barking incident with Jolly, and I hadn't seen a single patrol car. I hadn't seen the Vento either. Was there an overarching plot? If I was at the centre of a conspiracy, I sure as hell wished they'd get it over with. Such were my thoughts as the tedious hours slipped by. Frequent trips to the mirror in the bathroom were irresistible, despite the horrors I continued to encounter there. My skin had become dry and flaky in places, and I couldn't resist picking at it. It was like peeling a roasted onion. My eyes were bloodshot, and my vision was deteriorating. I'd resorted to wearing my reading glasses round the clock. I was at the end of my thread with it all, and should probably have asked for help, but to whom could I turn without dragging them into this mess with me? I was left with two choices. One, continue to decline in isolation with 1,000 unanswered questions swimming in my throbbing head, or two, take some affirmative action while I was still physically capable of doing so. And with that in mind, and this was just yesterday, I decided to head out once again, to comb the moor for further evidence of the strangeness that had caused my present condition. But this time, I prepared myself. I ate like a pig, filling up on calories, hoping that the grub would provide me with enough energy to complete the journey up to Winter Hill on foot. I couldn't take the car. Though it hadn't snowed for several days, temperatures had plummeted, making the roads icy and treacherous, the worst of which would be the service road up to the mast. With the advent of darkness, I wrapped up and sneaked out the back of the house. What a slow and painful hike that was. Unsteady and limping, The 2-mile journey to the two lads was the most difficult journey of my life. With every stride, my thighs screamed in protest, the soles of my feet burned, sending forks of flame shooting into my calves. My spine was stiff as a rod, forcing me to stoop forward as I went, putting tremendous pressure on my neck, and my hands, deep in the pockets of my coat, were the source of the worst pins and needles imaginable. That trek was torture. I don't know how long it took in the end. Hours, but when I did finally reach the cairns, I threw myself against the larger of the two and cried out in sheer anguish. But that was just the beginning of the night's ordeal. What I was looking for was the exact spot on which I'd been stood when I caught that last glimpse of my double in the snowstorm, the instant before that flash of light lit the night sky and transported me to that subterranean warren of horrors. The billowing snow had been extremely disorienting that night, so it was going to take a great deal of toil to locate the sought-after spot, and even if I thought I'd found it, how could I be sure that I actually had? Well, as I stumbled back and forth, wincing in pain as my joints continued to spasm, I saw, a few paces ahead of me, a hollow in the clumps of moor grass, 30 feet or so from the smaller of the two cairns, on the south side of Crooked Edge Hill. I approached the depression and peered down into it, and everything clicked into place. Again, I recalled the phone box and the calls, the police and the arrest, the various guises of my strange double. And then, quite suddenly and inexplicably, I recalled snippets of curious conversations I'd overheard while recovering in the darkness of the facility, inhuman voices speaking in a foreign tongue that somehow I was able to translate. "That equates to 5%, one of them said. "And this one?" came a second voice. "Conscious? It would appear so," answered the first. "How much it will retain, though, remains to be seen." "Interesting," said the other. "Then the entanglement trials must continue. Element status?" "Holding." It was all clear to me now. My double, whatever it started out as, had been sent to copy me, to absorb me inside and out, and once complete, tasked to return to where it came from. And not only me, others had been copied too. 5%? 5% of what? And what of that grey world beneath the surface, that replica world in which these copies were going about their mute business, the alternate Mr. Nash I encountered, for example? Were these clones being primed to replace us? What if some of us already had been replaced? Standing there in the cold, I began to tremble. Sweat appeared on my brow. And the hollow at my feet, the spot from which I thought I'd been yanked through a door or hatch, its contents were this: my frozen, dead body, killed instantly by the blazing light that had flashed over my head. 12. January 6th, 1998. So now you know what I am, what I've become. I'm the thing that stalked myself. Ridiculous, unbelievable. I'd been too close to the fiery heart of the light, my frail body torched by it, but entangled, as they put it, with my doppelganger, who had been transferred to that other place. It seems my consciousness went with it at the moment of my passing. What am I made up of? I haven't a clue, but I can't stop myself from thinking about that vat in the empty facility, that colourless mass of flesh that reeked of raw meat, and the notes of that unnamed scientist who quite clearly was involved in the creation of whatever it was that grew inside that canister. He knew his work was terrible, knew that his actions were unethical, but it was out of his hands, he said, his every move directed by powerful and malignant forces. Those forces demanded malleable monsters, creatures capable of mimicking human beings, and it would seem that's exactly what the scientist and his team delivered. There was some sort of fusion involving human genetic material and something else. My money's on extraterrestrial DNA, as crazy as that sounds. I doubt I'm far off the mark. I said I'd fill in the blanks, didn't I? Well, there you have it. If I'm wrong, well, time will tell, won't it? I'm weak, fading fast. The worst of it is the condition of my skin. It's oozing now. Every hour or so I'm forced to visit the bathroom, where, in front of the mirror, I apply bandages to my weeping flesh. Like old Nash in the Grey World, I look like a mummy, both in the skeletal limbs, torso and face I'm sporting, and the gunk-soaked dressings covering 75% of my body. It's a dreadful thing, I know, but this vessel isn't mine. Never was. The persistent pain is but a temporary indisposition. And as I stand there, struggling to keep my balance on stick-like legs, my recollections haunt me. Fleeting visions of scuttling through the undergrowth, creeping at curb height from street to street, crawling on all fours through empty yards. Memories of encounters with my old self, face to face in the bedroom upstairs. Images of the human face that I was once able to call mine. I remember the arrest and my subsequent incarceration, of the ghastly manner by which I was able to escape from that holding cell. Jesus! But I won't describe that. Not here, anyway. Let's just say that this body is far more flexible than I'd like to believe. No wonder it's coming apart. I only hope that these words are still legible. My hands are shaking terribly now. My feeble, wasted hands. My old self is disappearing. It's only by referring to the beginning of this script that I'm able to remind myself of the facts, the unbelievable realities that even now I'm having a tough time swallowing. The original me is up there on the moor, as cold as the ground on which it lies, undiscovered for now. Will they be looking for it? Will they retrieve it, or will they leave it to rot? But I spoke of a job, didn't I? Something I need to do to put an end to all this, an end to the threat we're all faced with. There's something up there on Winter Hill. It's always been there, folk like my dad say. A mysterious force of nature, the intermittent presence of which causes the occurrence of strange and inexplicable things. I think it's the element, as briefly discussed by those strange voices I heard, something that, at least to my mind, is enhanced by the transmitter up there. The malignant forces responsible for my transformation know this. The TV mast may as well be broadcasting an invitation to those foul things, an invitation to step into our reality and take over from within, to strip us of our humanity and replace us, one by one. Who they are and where they come from, I don't know. Why they're doing what they're doing is another question I can't answer. They're not like us, they don't look like us, and they certainly don't behave like us. I only know that I'm a consequence of their horrifying experiments, and I, like them, must be eradicated. I don't even want to think about what 5% could be referring to. I mean, the cloning and subsequent replacement of 5% of Narrow Valley's small population is terrifying enough. But what if 5% is applied to the entire county, or even the country? My efforts may be in vain, but I have to believe I can do something, that my awareness of what's happening puts me in a unique position. At the very least, I must try. The details of my plan will not be included here. I can't risk exposure prior to its execution. I don't know what else to say. It's getting late and I need to get going. I'm not sure how far I'll get. It's a long walk and it's all uphill. I'm weak, dreadfully weak. With that Vento outside again, I'm going to have to sneak out the back way and hope to God I'm not spotted. And what about the police? What's their involvement now? Too many questions. Too little time. If I make it as far as the post box, you'll at least know that I reached the top of Chapel Lane. Wish me luck. I'm going to need it. Roman Hammond Smith, January 6th, 1998. Winter Hill TV mast targeted by vandals. By Barry Ellum. From the Bolton Evening News, January 8th, 1998. A local landmark at Winter Hill has been targeted by vandals. Police were called to Rivington Moor on Tuesday, January 7th, following reports of significant damage to a support wire. These support wires, of which there are 15 in total, hold the mast vertical. The loss of any one of them could result in the catastrophic collapse of the transmitter. The site remains temporarily closed to the public. Police believe this was an isolated incident and is in no way connected to the discovery of the frozen remains of a local man found later the same day on the slopes of Crooked Edge Hill. Enquiries remain ongoing and no arrests have been made.
If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time.